We are live.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Atheist Republic Sunday morning hangout, or whatever time and day it is where you live. Thanks for joining us today if you're joining us live. And just right off the bat, to let you know if you would like to contribute to the conversation, one of the easiest ways to do that is to tweet at us at Atheist Republic, and you can hashtag Atheist Republic, and I will try to pick those up as we go if you have any questions or comments. If you're watching this in YouTube, obviously you can leave your comments below, and we try to respond to some, pick some up, put them on the website. Lots of ways to get involved here today. Today with us so far we have Emoj, Casper, Philippe, and Arif. And again, my name is Makisha, if I didn't say that at the beginning. Today we're going to talk about the historicity of religion, religious figures, religious lore. Is there historical evidence? Is there not? Is there an argument about this going on still about certain things? And how do atheists feel differently about this issue? And so we'll have people popping in as we go. Oh, we already have Costas joined us, and we'll have people joining us a little bit later as well, as per usual. So let's just get started with whoever wants to just kind of chime in right off the bat. What are your thoughts about this conversation within an atheist context? What is your experience with atheists talking about historical figures within religion? Is there a historical Jesus, etc.? So just comment on the sidebar or raise a hand, and we'll just dive right in. Casper.
Okay, so personally, I'm a mythicist, especially when it comes to Jesus, Christianity, most biblical figures, actually. I also have my doubts about the historicity of Muhammad, and most of that is for very good reason, because the historical records that we have often contradict these biblical or these religious texts, and also we don't have a lot of outside corroboration outside of those religious texts. So it becomes a matter of what evidence do we have that some of these figures existed or that these things happened. And oftentimes we see that there isn't any real good evidence for it outside of the religious text. And also, as archaeology explores these ideas more, and we explore these ideas from a historical standpoint, we come to find that a lot of these ideas are actually false. Take Noah and the flood, for example. Archaeologically and historically speaking, we can make a pretty valid assertion that this flood event never actually happened, at least not in the way that it was described in the Bible, or even if we go back to the earlier Sumerian texts, which the Bible is obviously plagiarized to come up with this story. So it becomes pretty apparent that these things didn't actually happen and they're not historically factual. But oddly enough, it seems that a lot of atheists will take the religious stance on this as being the standard when it comes to the existence of Jesus. Most atheists just accept what the religious world has put out there on this matter and say that that's the definitive truth. And the fact is that's not how this works. If you don't have definitive truth or facts, you have to look at the evidence. And the evidence doesn't actually support the case. The same goes with the Exodus. This is not a historically accurate representation of history itself. And we have plenty of evidence to support that claim. So it's very odd to me how the sort of schism that exists even within the atheist community over this historicity issue and mythicism, such as the position that I take.
Would anybody else like to chime in right off the bat and give us some conversation fodder? So I'm curious how you all think about this in terms of maybe, for example, like the flood situation, Noah's Ark. It seems like most thinking Christians don't even really accept that as literal, but So there's a lot of accounts, there's a lot of stories in the Bible, for example. I'm not as familiar with the Quran, although I've read it. I'm not as versed in it. But there's a lot of these stories, a lot of these accounts that we might be able to point to and say, okay, that's not true. But what about, can we separate the figures, the religious figures, from the accounts? So we can say that's not historically accurate, but perhaps this person actually did exist. So maybe that's a question. Did Jesus, in your mind, exist? Did Muhammad exist? Or are they representations, metaphors, amalgamations of different people, different stories? Philippe.
Yeah, well, pretty much. I hope everyone hears me. Okay, so pretty much the only criteria for me is that do your enemies talk about you? That's all it takes. If you want to take account about Napoleon, just ask all the guys he beats. If you want to take account of the Roman Empire, just look at all the people they beat in battles or that they invaded and conquered and whatever. And so when you have a historical figure, it may be a philosopher, it may be a religious man, it may be a political man. Well, they have pros and they have cons. And cons are very vocal. It's very easy to say, I don't like this guy, etc. You know that in every trade things and etc. In the market, you know that a happy customer is going to talk about two people about how happy he is, but an unhappy customer is going to say about 8 or 9% at the time. And it's the same thing about political, religious, or philosophical subject. When people are angry, they are very vocal about it. Well, about Jesus, for example, no one talks about him. No one except the Bible. In all around, and first place, the Romans, they don't talk about him. It doesn't exist. He does not exist. When, for example, he comes back to Jerusalem, and the Bible said that the half of the city is there to welcome him. He's on his donkey and whatever. Hello, I'm the king of the Jews. Hello, I'm over there. Okay, just imagine for 2 seconds like the General de Gaulle arriving in Paris during Second World War, and the whole Wehrmacht is just there, and don't notice that the half of Paris is there to welcome the guy. It's exactly the same thing. It's like Jesus is over there, I'm the king of the Jews, and no officer, no Roman officer noticed the fact. Very weird. Well, there's a lot of things like that, but I think the main thing, if you want to know if somebody exists, and that's why we have good reason to think that Muhammad existed in some sort of way, is because his victims talked about him. And so I think it's a good way to know if someone was real in history. Perhaps not what we have in account, but exist, at least if he existed or not. I think it's the main point.
That's a really interesting point, and I believe there's only a couple references outside of Christianity to Jesus. I'm not only one. Okay, Philippe says only one. I'm not sure. I don't actually know all of the references of Muhammad. Would anybody like to give us a primer on the historicity of Muhammad, if you have knowledge of such?
Well, I don't claim to. Can you hear me? Okay. I don't claim to actually have a full knowledge of this whole matter, but I was finding a bit of information by a historian called Tom Holland. Not sure if you heard of this guy. Is this showing on the screen now? Can you see something on the screen? Yeah. And is the writing legible? So this documentary called Islam, the Untold Story. It's on Vimeo. If you can find it on Vimeo, it's not on YouTube because it's a United Kingdom Channel 4 based production, and it was gagged by Islamists, none other than Islamists. They're very expert on doing those things. So I'll post the link here if I can later on. Actually, why don't I do it now before I forget? So this is the link. It's an hour-long discussion, and it's a very good documentary by Tom Holland. And so far, from a non-Islamic background, a true history of Islam, obviously is related to Muhammad, has been documented, and he's been getting a lot of threats of late because of revealing the problems of Islam. Historicity, Muhammad is kind of intertwined with the history of Islam because people say that he's the person who kind of invented Islam, plagiarized a lot from different other previous religion, and because he was a very good con person or con man, he did blend his current needs through verses that was revealed to him directly. And so Muhammad's own life and history is very much intertwined with the life of Islam itself. And he is definitely a real person because the history is not that old. And unlike Christianity, where, for example, the Gospels were told after a long time after Jesus died, anything you hear about Muhammad is actually directly come from him. So there are two different versions of it. One is Hadith, which is directly the verses that Muhammad said. The other verses were his alter ego, Allah, and those are classed in a separate book called the Quran, which happened to be kind of the literal Islamic book. So Muhammad is real, and that's all I can say. And he's just a warlord. Happened to have some break in his early life when he got married to a businesswoman 16 years older than him, and he was under her control, I should say, until she died, and gave all the fortune to Muhammad. And then he decided that this normal business of products is not the best business for him, so he came up with the business of that land at that time, which is philosophy business, or should I say religious business. So that's kind of a history of Islam in a nutshell. Maybe I'll join in later on. That's all from me for the time being.
Thanks, Rafe. That was great. There are also, I do know, more references to Muhammad outside of Islam than there are to Jesus outside of Christianity. And the big question that so often comes up, or I can't think of the word right now, but the big issue that comes up with Christianity is that so much of what was written and came out so much later, and also contradicts its own self, which obviously is a lot of what people point to as well. Which I think, in my mind, doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus didn't exist, but it definitely calls to question what kind of person he was, or what he actually did, or whatever. And that's kind of, I think to me that's a difficult question to answer anyway. Did these people exist? Well, you can write, excuse me, you can write a novel, and it can be about people who exist in your life, but they're completely different representations in your novel, right? So there's even to say, well, somebody existed who did these things. Maybe somebody existed at that time who said some of that stuff, or did some of those things, or whatever. So I think maybe that's also makes the conversation and the studies of it a little bit difficult as well. One of the which question do I want to ask first? So what do you guys think is the reason? So there seems to be a general sort of sense that there isn't a whole lot of evidence for the historicity of Jesus. I'm still not sure where I land on that. But why do you think that atheists there's so many who seem to be very strongly on board with Jesus existing as a historical figure. Because I do know that this is a pretty hearty conversation within atheist communities. What is the impetus or the need for so many atheists to continue believing that, even if maybe there's so many who don't, or there's a lot of evidence that points to the lack thereof? Casper.
Well, my personal thought on this, and what I seem to have seen from most atheists in dealing with this, is that we've tended to grow up in a culture where we are indoctrinated with the idea of Jesus. It's been ingrained in us to just accept the narrative that's been given, and that narrative is written by the religious, by Christians. That narrative comes from Christianity itself. So most of us grow up with that narrative, and we accept it as truth, regardless of the cognitive dissonance that comes up when we approach the issues with whether or not that's factually true or not. I think a lot of people have trouble overcoming that cognitive dissonance. It becomes difficult uh, to disallow what we've all been indoctrinated with and come to accept as truth earlier in our lives. Um, the idea of God itself even causes issues for some atheists, and that's why you get a lot of people who don't actually believe in God, but they call themselves agnostic, because they feel like they can't prove a God doesn't exist, so they just want to ride the fence on it. And I think that's what we have to overcome. We have to overcome the tendency to just ride the fence and instead make a definitive decision on where we stand. And a lot of people have a lot of difficulty with that. Like I said, it gets back to just accepting the narrative that we've all been given all of our lives.
Philippe.
Well, yeah, it's very, very, very difficult to question the very existence of Jesus when you're part of a civilization who is a great deal, at least in the West, built on this figure. So how do you cope with the fact that you're saying we're in 2015 of somebody who never existed? That's our date, that's our calendar. I mean, some of our scientific calculations, dates, are based on very probably a mythical figure. How do you cope with that? How do you make people understand that Jesus probably never existed, and even if he existed, our calendar is wrong because he was born before or after the supposed date? And it's just crazy. So our whole world, and the whole world is working on this, and except for Muslim people who talk in dates according to Mohammed's calendar, we're on a Judeo-Christian calendar for the whole world. So how do you make people understand that this is just a convention, and it doesn't have any real existence, because the zero of our calendar is based on somebody who never existed, probably. It's very difficult to understand and to accept such an idea that is based on nothing.
Yeah, I think it is. It's kind of one of those things where if somebody says, "I don't believe Jesus existed," there's not a whole lot more to say, I think, at that point. So maybe, I mean, it's like, I guess it's really not. It doesn't provide for much robust conversation. Although I guess the question I have for you guys, it does seem to be, from what I know of and from what I've read, that there still seems to be a general consensus amongst historical scholars, those who study historical documents and antiquity, that Jesus did actually exist, was a person of some sort. There are a variety of things that they say, the accounts that they would say are historically accurate, or at least as close to historically accurate as you can assess from so long ago. First of all, what is your understanding of where those arguments stand now, and what do you think that is all about? Particularly Philippe and Casper, who seem to be very strongly on the mythicist side of the argument. What is how do you reconcile that? What are your thoughts about that? What are your recent sort of understandings about that particular issue, Casper?
Actually, I recently attended a conference in Milwaukee with Mythicists Milwaukee put on, and they had a speaker there, David Fitzgerald, and he's done a great deal of study in this area, and produced some great material on it. In fact, he's got another book coming out shortly called Jesus, Mything in Action, which one of the things he touches on in this is that most of what we have as far as the acceptance of Jesus' existence comes from the religious, and that even includes collegiate scholars, because most of these scholars get their degrees in theology from schools which actually require them to outrightly state that they will not contradict the accepted fact that Jesus exists. So their entire livelihoods can be put at stake simply by making a claim and questioning this idea. And outside of that community, there's almost no voices, because we don't take this up in the secular schools as much, in the secular collegiate world. So it tends to be something that if you want to have a degree in biblical studies and the study of Jesus and whatnot, and historicity of Christianity, you have to kind of toe the line in the Christian curriculum. And I know that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but he presents some really, really good facts on the matter, especially as far as having to sign, pretty much sign documents that say you're not going to contradict this, and that can cost you your livelihood to do so. And so I think where we need to focus is embracing this in the secular community and in secular schools, and saying, look, we need to offer a different viewpoint. We need to allow people to be contradictory. If you want to contradict this idea, do so and present the evidence. There are a handful of people out there that do. Richard Carrier is a great example, and he's produced a lot of good work on this issue. But he's only one example, and it's because of this sort of stranglehold that Christianity has on theology, especially in the West, and especially in the collegiate level, as far as professors and stuff goes. So it's hard for them to actually have a voice.
Philippe, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? I didn't know if I saw your hand or not. Yes? Do you have something to add? Great.
Okay, so yeah, it's what Casper just said is very, very real, because we have that specialist. I don't recall exactly his name, but he's one of the specialists and theologian, and he's a specialist of ancient scriptures. It's the kind of guy who can read Sanskrit like this, whatever. And he was asked about the whole Flavius Joseph case, about the fact that a lot of theologians and scholars consider that there is the part that says, where he talks about Jesus, was a fraud, was an adding. So the conversation goes on about the scriptures and the fact that there is no recollection outside the Bible about the historical figure of Jesus. And at a very certain time, at a point, he was like, yeah, but I choose to believe. So he is a scholar, he is a super theologian, super specialist. He's one of the guys who owns the knowledge about those texts and the fact that they're ancient and the datation and etc. and the origins and the evolution of the scriptures and etc. etc. But he's a believer. What can you do? How many non-believers are so involved in the research, in the scholarship, in the knowledge of all those ancient scriptures? Very, very, very few. And it's the question is that more of them are arriving to this level. But all the guys before were very interested to test their faith in some sort. They were like, okay, I have doubt, I have to search, and they were curious, etc. But always with this underground that I'm gonna have the confirmation that my faith is based on something solid. It's just like the guy who is digging to find Noah's Ark or whatever city, or in Jerusalem or Bethlehem or Nazareth. That's a very good example. It's when you have independent search and archaeological work, they found that Nazareth was founded like 300 years after Jesus. And when they are believers, oh, miracle! It's just before. So it's very difficult for non-believers to state that no, your work is not clear, and you have a bias because of your faith and because of the fact that you want to believe. You are doing an interpretation of the facts, and it's very difficult because there are still few of them. But the number is starting to change. Okay, so you understood.
I think it's also almost, as I was thinking, that there's a lot of religions that don't seem to, I wouldn't say a lot, there are other religions that don't seem to have a problem with accepting that they're based on essentially a lot of myths and legends and stories, and that the characters, even the prime characters or gods even in their religion might not necessarily have ever been. They're prophets, they're speakers, they're preachers, whatever. And yet they don't have a problem sort of living into that tension and being like, yeah, but here I am, I still believe, I still worship, whatever. And so I was thinking this would be it would be impossible. You couldn't be, I can't imagine that you could even be a Christian and accept any sort of doubt that Jesus existed or even existed in the form that is represented in the Bible, because of the whole atonement component to it, and the fact that is what makes Christianity Christianity. I was thinking about Judaism, for example, which is Judaism in a lot of ways flows right into Christianity from a historical, religion perspective, and it approaches this very differently. And I just don't think, because of the whole salvation thing, you can ever really bring that into question, which might contribute to the reason why this is a very difficult thing to study from any sort of secular or objective perspective. Also, the rigors that are applied to it, are applied to other areas of historical research, just don't seem to be applied. And I think there probably is just that undercurrent of Christian belief that makes that very difficult. Arif, you had something to add.
Yeah, just not too much actually. Just wanted to add from an Islamic side how Islam deals with history. What I've found is that, like any religion, the current religious authorities or people who are behind, promoting the religion, relies on narrative creation. And narrative is something that generally the subject of religion, for example, the religious people or followers rely on. That not necessarily is a reflection of the actual history of that religion, and whatever is told in the name of that religion may not necessarily be the actual accounts of that story. So, for example, in Islam, we know that I can't really compare between, for example, what Christianity used to do 400 years ago, but these days I can say clearly that Islamists or people who promote Islam uses rhetoric and deceit to actually to promote what they wanted to say. They're absolutely not interested in the facts and logic and using actual historical accounts. So, for example, one of the example is before Muhammad appeared, the state of social justice in the Arabic land, or the land at that time, was really bad. That's what the narrative tells us. They call it Ayyam-e Jahliyat, which roughly translates the era of total anarchy. And they use examples, for example, that female children were not accepted, and they were usually buried alive. And they use that analogy or visual quite prominently to create a context for everyone else to accept Islam or Muhammad as a savior of this whole thing, which is actually absolute rubbish, because as I told before, Muhammad started in a business when he was 24, and he got married to a businesswoman who was running a quite successful business at that time, and he was kind of the first hand of that woman, and she was Khadija, and she's not the only example of women running business at that time. So Ayyam-e Jahliyat is a complete fabrication by the Islamists, and they have no regard to the real history. The other facts, for example, they were saying that the current cultural state of the pre-Muhammad era was really bad, which is also a rubbish thing, because at that time in Arab we see a lot of examples of prosperity in terms of cultural activities. For example, poetry, an instant, like not rapping, but similar banter between two poets would happen on the fly. It's not going to be and that was quite a prominent thing, and it required a lot of intellect and a lot of skill set. Obviously, after Muhammad's time, all those people involved in those sort of poetic activities were killed or systematically shut down. But that part of history never comes to life from an Islamist face. They also use the example of poetry is quite inherent in the Quran. How Arabic languages comes into life in Quran is quite poetic, but they do not, or the Islamists do not give any credit to the current cultural state. And Muhammad himself was friend with a lot of poets. Unfortunately, he killed a lot of them as well, because they found the bullshit in the things that he was saying. Some of them he actually beheaded in front of him, and this is an example of Muhammad's time beheading in front of him. Although Islamists say that he did not condone beheading, but that is the fact, and there are evidences of that. So and these days the narrative makers always distort the actual historical accounts of that time and come up with their own shit, and they have kind of religious justification of doing that sort of illegal activities. I thought that and I think a lot of religion these days do the same as well, but not as Islamists do.
Thanks, Ruth. That's really good information, and I think it also brings us back to why this matters. You know, so much of these arguments and conversations come up, and a lot of people, you know, would say, "What difference does it make? Let people believe what they want to believe." I think that's a great example of why it matters and why it needs to be challenged and thought about carefully and studied with the same amount of rigor we expect from every other area of our research into history and archaeology and just antiquity in general. Anybody else have anything to add to that? I'm gonna, Amoj wanted to talk a bit about kind of the history, some of his thoughts about the history of religion in general. If you are ready for that, Amoj, you can unmute your mic. Since I can't see your video, I can't tell. Okay, I'm not sure if Amoj is actually even at his computer at the moment. So, oh, yep. Oh, I'm getting. He's talking to me in the sidebar. I also want to get Arif, if you would, before we sign off, if you would let us know kind of the state of things in Bangladesh. You haven't been in our chats for a while, and I've wanted to get some of your thoughts and experiences lately. We haven't addressed that for many weeks, so I kind of wanted to give you an opportunity to do that. So actually, if you want to talk about that right now, that'd be great, and then we can go back and talk a little bit more about this issue whenever other people are ready.
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. Bangladesh is a weird place, as you all know. So far throughout the year, you have seen so many weird things happening. We had a number of our colleagues killed, and a lot of us we've been kind of banging our heads on the wall, trying to find justice, and get the got a lot of you can hear me, right, guys? Yeah, okay. So and we saw the government was quite uninterested about what we were trying to get. So interestingly, government has for the last, I think, a month ago, part of a combined crackdown on Islamists, started doing some work, not as a result of the bloggers killing, but apparently the killings have expanded from bloggers to publishers now, and then foreign workers, expatriates working in Bangladesh are now being killed, followed by Christian priests and Japanese citizens. So it's kind of going all over the place. And most weirdly, almost 2-3 weeks ago, as you know, ISIS has a publication, they call it The Big or something like that. An ISIS publication has, after Paris brutality and massacre, ISIS has said that now they're going to focus on Bangladesh. For some strange reason, leaving all those countries behind, ISIS decides that Bangladesh now needs to be punished. I don't know why ISIS thinks that Bangladesh should come after Paris. I somehow feel honored, because if you are an enemy of ISIS just after Paris, that means you have done something right to piss off ISIS. Anyways, I hope that doesn't happen, but Bangladesh government seems to have taken some interest into that threat, however not in the right manner. As a response, Bangladesh government has now shut down Facebook inside Bangladesh for the last 15 days or so, and which is very weird. Bangladesh government wanted Facebook to give control of how moderation is done to Bangladesh government. And Facebook doesn't really give a shit about it, and Facebook said, go away. And so then government, kind of send them a letter and say that, you need to come and sit down with us for 50. So Indian-based Facebook authorities decided, and they actually met Bangladesh government today, I don't know the outcome of it because Facebook has still not been opened up. During this time, a lot of weird stuff has happened. For example, government said security is not the main thing. We are blocking Facebook. We want, they're using excuses. For example, safety of women needs to be ensured, and that's why we need to control Facebook and all this bullshit. So yeah, it's very weird. Unfortunately for us, no further bloggers have been killed. We don't know if it's going to resume or not, but it's an utter disgrace within Bangladesh that voices of dissent, that we call them, are being shut down by government through the blasphemy laws. There's another glimmer of hope. We hope that there is a challenge to the Section 57 blasphemy law in a court now. I am in touch with the people who are running the case within Bangladesh. I'm rallying a lot of support from external support, a lot of support from India. I think Amog might be able to corroborate that in India earlier this year, they were successful in repealing the blasphemy law, I think Section 66 or something like that. So we are trying to do the same. We don't want to make it, we don't want to detail too much of it because still case under in the court and a lot of things are happening at this moment. We're fighting our best, but the government doesn't seem to be interested in what we say, although a lot of people are interested. Just to give you an idea, Facebook in Bangladesh matters because although the penetration of internet is not that huge, Bangladesh seems to have 28 million Facebook registered users in Bangladesh. We have 160 million people, very small space, but within that we have 28 million. And just to put it in perspective, United Kingdom have 65% penetration. United Kingdom's population is, I think, 65 million or something like that. Out of that, United Kingdom have 32 million Facebook registered users. Bangladesh, only 20% penetration, but registered Facebook users is 28 million. That tells you, how important Facebook is within Bangladesh. So that's my update. I hope there would be better updates in future about the blasphemy laws. End of my chat.
Thanks a lot, Arif. That was good and sad still. I appreciate the information, but what a mess. I'm glad to hear that the killings themselves have quieted down, and hopefully that will stay the case, so that the hard work of lasting action can take place in terms of getting things to change at the government level, which is very hard to do when there's so much chaos surrounding these killings. So hopefully now that is not happening at the moment, some of that other work can get done. So thanks again, and thanks for being in the trenches there. I'm going to give Amog a chance to share some thoughts, and I'm going to put up before that. I'm going to go ahead and try to share the images with everybody. So here we go. Let's try this. I've actually not even tried this before, so I have the opportunity to share my screen. How do I do that? There we go. Okay. Sorry, everybody. You have to just kind of go through this with me. Okay, so if somebody wants to unmute their mic and let me know if you're even seeing these images here that I am seeing, because I can't have both windows open at the same time.
Yeah, they're up there and clear, Makisha.
Okay, great, thank you. So just take a look at these, and then these can possibly be referenced. These are comparative religious images, and I'm going to give them a chance to actually talk about these, but I think everybody will probably start seeing a common thread as we take a look. I assume that as I'm doing this, my picture is still showing up for the YouTube, but who knows? We'll find out. Okay, Amog, I'm going to yield the floor to you. I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. Okay. Amog, go ahead.
Hello everyone, my name is Amog Gazre. I'm a researcher at Atheist Republic. I'll be talking about overall origins of religion. According to me, art is a thing which can take us to the origin of religions, because our ancestors have printed like they have painted everything they saw or they imagined. So art is the only way we can go to the origin of religion. So I have shown some evidences of paintings. They were some ancient paintings. I'm going to talk about mostly Hinduism and a little Islam and Christianity too. Firstly, in Hinduism, in Vedas, which is like a Bible of Hinduism, it's clearly written that God is imageless and formless. But still there are like thousands of idols in Hinduism. Then the other evidence, as we have seen, there were many pictures of a goddess killing a demon. There, can you share it, Makisha?
Yes. One sec.
Yeah.
I think if you speak, the system automatically puts you on the portal, so we can only see you.
Yeah, so I'll have to talk while I'm Okay, so the goddess killing the demon. Let's see if I can remember which one that was. No? Yes?
Yeah. That's the one in the state of Maharashtra. As we change the state or the region, the appearances change. Here the goddess is killing the demon in forest. The second image, it is killing in temple. Third image, it's like a space. And what is this? I don't know. Yeah, then we can conclude that it's human imagination which made God. And it was not like God came on earth and showed himself. It is all human imagination. Then the next evidence. Yeah, then the mythological stories. Many Hindu radicalists say that mythological stories are true and they happened sometime in the history. But if we take a famous scripture in Hinduism or Ramayana, it has 200 versions in total. And of course, we can't trust some story which has 200 versions as true. That's the second evidence. And I have been studying on it for 3 months. Yeah, then some of the paintings, I don't have their copies now. They tell clearly that the human imagination made God by seeing the events in nature. Like they didn't know any reason for rains or lightnings or such natural phenomena, which we came to know in the later era. So to pretend that they know nature fully, they created a concept of God. So that's what I conclude from the paintings, and the origins of religion lie only in the human imagination. We can conclude from it. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thanks, Amog. That's really good, and I love that you brought up the issue of art. I want to give our panel here a chance to respond to any of that or share any thoughts. Okay, let's start with Arif and then Casper.
Yeah, this was amazing. I was obviously brought up in Bangladesh, which is next to India, and lucky for me, I understand the context, historical context Amog is saying, and it's really interesting because what he was saying that because India is so vast and there are so many different regions and the culture is stark, the difference between them is really very high contrast, and each region has to come up with their own way of portraying the same story, but using local figures and facts, so that the local people can relate to. This is interesting. This is completely different to Islam, where the same story and the portrayal would be always central, which is like Arabic. It has to be. So it really is interesting. And also, I think in Christianity, maybe I'm stealing someone else's thunder, but there are stories about black Jesus in some places where uh, obviously not the most popular Jesus, but in some territories, the skin color of Jesus changes based on what the local people population is. So yeah, it is interesting to see.
Casper.
Okay, so just to touch on what Amog brings up or brought up with the imagery and whatnot, it actually extends a little further than imagery, and I'd like to share an image with everyone here, real quick. Let me see if I can share my screen real quick. I can find it. Okay, just share the entire screen, and sorry about that loop. Okay, can everyone see this? This
Yes.
poster I've got up here.
Yep.
Okay, this is very hard to read or make out from this image, but I'll share it, share a link to it with everyone on the video. And what this poster represents is the actual evolution or evolutionary tree of mythology and religion as it relates to all religion. And if you look at this closely, you can actually see the interconnectivity between religion from its very beginning all the way up to what it is now. And it's a very, hold on, let me get myself back up. There we go. Okay, so it's very interesting to understand that ideas evolve much in the same way that we talk about evolution from a physiological standpoint, and religion is no exception to that. It started from one singular idea that has grown into many differing ideas, and if we put enough time into it and actually study it, we can see historically how things have progressed and how they've evolved. And imagery does give us a good hint to that, but also the stories themselves, the interconnectivity. Like I mentioned earlier, the story of Noah is almost entirely a plagiarism of an earlier Sumerian text, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And historians understand that to be pretty much a factual truth. So this is why the historicity of religion is important, because it comes back to the mythology behind all of these ideas and these people, and it's not just the people themselves, but the events, such as the Exodus, Noah's flood, the Garden of Eden. So there's some great information about that, and I think that people will choose their own way to interpret things and to understand things, and how their belief system works. But at the same time, when you get right down to it, it's like you said, Makisha, how can you accept that Jesus wasn't a real figure and still be a Christian? And it comes back to you can't. And when you understand that a little fully, you also understand that you can't disallow the Garden of Eden and original sin and still believe in Jesus, because you're negating the necessity for Jesus. There's no need for a Savior if there's no original sin. And so they're all interconnected. These pieces go together in like a little jigsaw puzzle. And if you're missing a piece, the puzzle doesn't work. So this gives rise to fundamentalism, because fundamentalists like Ken Ham and like ISIS and stuff, they're silly in a lot of what they do, but they understand one thing full well, which is you can't put the puzzle together without all the pieces. And so they understand you have to accept all these things as truth, otherwise it doesn't work.
Philippe, go ahead.
Just to have a rebound on what Casper just said, I don't agree. You don't need to be a fundamentalist. I have friends and superiors on my work, etc., and they're high-class person, etc., and they're Muslims, and they're devoted Muslims, not very much okay, so they don't cut the throat themselves to the mutton in Eid and etc., but they're doing the Ramadan and etc., and they're genuine believers, even they are highly educated person. And so they're not fundamentalists because they're always talking about you must interpret, you have to understand, you have to read books, you have to put in context, etc., etc. You have to put in context. But they believe in Jesus. They believe in the ark. They believe in angels. They believe in so many bullshit that you can't even. It's just like I was having a conversation with him, and he was talking about the fact that God is talking to anyone on earth, and I was just like saying, okay, but what about the Chinese at the same time? You're talking about the rights of women, etc., and that was a good thing. But in China, for example, at the same time, they had more power in family life and etc., and in front of justice. So how do you explain? And when people who believe in that God of the Middle East came into China and talked about the transcendence of God, well, the whole court and the whole Chinese ministries and etc., they just laughed at it because it was so ridiculous. It was an idea that didn't make sense for them, so they just laughed like it's what a stupid idea. So and he said, yeah, but when was it? Was it after Adam and Eve? And you're just like, what can you say to someone who says such a thing? I mean, it's just like the Earth is 6,000 years for them, and they sell computers.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before. There's a certain admiration I have of fundamentalists because at least there's a consistency. There doesn't seem to be as much of that cognitive dissonance that has to be managed all the time. I think it seems to be in my experience that people who really start questioning, people who really maybe have doubts or fears or that they really are not quite sure where they stand for a while, they seem to either solve that by continuing further away from religion or continuing deeper in. I think maintaining that constant tension seems to be difficult, but I don't know. I'm constantly amazed at how much cognitive dissonance human beings are able to live with. So, maybe it's really not as difficult for everyone as it has been for me. I want to wrap up here. We're about 2 minutes to the hour, so if anybody has any last thoughts before we finish up, I want to give you a chance either on this subject or anything else that you would like to bring up quickly. Casper.
So my last point to put out there, and it somewhat just to sort of tackle what Philippe said, how much of, and it's a question for any religious person, how much of the narrative can you let go of before you're no longer involved in the religion? And that's a serious question to ask. How much can you interpret to your own personal standards before you're no longer actually a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu? And that's a serious question that people should ask themselves. How much do you have to take away before it no longer matters anymore? And I think that's why we see such a rise in deism and agnosticism. People just understand you can't take so much away from the narrative and still say that it applies. So I just like for every religious person out there, if you're watching this, ask yourself that question. How much of the narrative do you have to lose before it just doesn't matter anymore?
Thanks, Casper. Great point. And on that, we're going to wrap up for today. Thanks for joining us if you've been watching us live. We always have a handful of you. Thanks for watching. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave the comments below. You can go to atheistrepublic.com and you can email us, contact us from there. You can volunteer through our website. We have hundreds of volunteers that make Atheist Republic what it is and make it run day in and day out to serve atheists around the world. We would love for you to join our team. If you are able, and if Atheist Republic speaks to you and adds value to your life, please consider making a financial contribution. You can do that on our website as well, atheistrepublic.com. Again, I'm Makisha. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to our panel, and have a great week.